you might live a long way away, or you don't see them very often. And for grandparents, you might be quite poorly, or you might still be working and super busy. So there's all these kind of multiple possibilities around your relationship with your grandchildren, which can make it feel very complicated.
Are you a grandparent by blood, adoption, or to young people you've drawn into your circle of care and affection? Or do you have a number of grandparents in your church? Passing on faith as a grandparent may feel a little tricky. Some might say, my grandchildren live far away, I don't see them all that often. How can I make an impact? My children don't attend church anymore, so what can I do to make sure my grandchildren can learn about faith? Or my grandchildren only come to church with me occasionally, how can I make the most of that time? Today we're exploring grandparenting for faith with Becky Sedgwick, unpacking how you can support your grandchildren or the grandparents in your congregation to confidently and prayerfully pass on faith to the younger generation. Thanks for joining us on the Roots for Churches podcast. Here we go. Hello, Becky. Great to have you on the Roots for Churches podcast.
Hi, Mel. Nice to see you again.
Oh, it's lovely that we're getting to do this. See your smiley face. So, Becky, you're living in Wiltshire and you work for the organisation Parenting for Faith. Can you tell us a bit about Parenting for Faith and how you got involved?
Yes. Parenting for Faith is, it's the most remarkable organisation from my point of view, because prior to working for them, I was a children and families worker in a local church. And one of the things that happened was I was a keen bean. I hadn't had any particular training, but I'd worked with children a long time. I loved the Bible. I could do this stuff. And I worked really, really hard to produce resources and curriculum and stuff. And I love the families in my church. And after about 2 years, I'm like a little bit frustrated because they don't rock up every Sunday. I'm like, yeah, I rocked up to church. I've got this amazing curriculum and I really passionately wanted these kids to get it. And I inputted into the kids, focused on the kids, ran holiday clubs, groups, Saturday morning stuff. And, and then it began to get really tough because I realized that my method of trying to input dramatically into these kids wasn't particularly fruitful. I mean, it wasn't unfruitful, but it was hard. And then, actually, we went to New Wine as a church, and the sort of 9-10-year-olds in my church came rushing back from their morning group, and they were like telling me stories of stuff that was going on, and in particular that they were talking in terms I'd never heard of about connecting with God and about their purpose and stuff. And I'm like, I want to know what's going on here. So I knocked on the door of the big shed where the group was. And I'm like, I need to talk to the person in charge. And that turned out to be a lady called Rachel Turner. And she was uber busy running this thing. And I knocked on every day. And on the last morning, she opened the door and she thrust this load of paper at me, which was her notes for the sessions. And I read it and I realized that this was a different approach and one that I really liked. And so that was my introduction to what's now called Parenting for Faith, this lady called Rachel Turner, who was a children and families worker in her local church. And had come across the same problem as me, was that, like, you can input into children you like, but they're kids and they may not turn up. And she chatted to God about this, and he told her what we knew, actually, which was that discipleship is best done by parents and carers and the immediate family, because, they know their kids better, they love their kids more, they've got loads more time with them. I only had an hour a week with these kids, and I'm like, come on, learn more.
And that's if they come every week.
And now they don't come every week. Yeah, and so it's Parenting for Faith exists to resource parents and carers and the communities that surround them, including the church, to disciple kids well. And the way we do this is by equipping the parents to be the primary disciplers. And then I use the Parenting for Faith method or ideas in church for a little while. It transformed my ministry because the focus becomes the family and not the individual child. Because statistically, if you reach an individual child, I think it's something like, I may be wrong, 6% of families follow them to faith. If you reach the parent, the children follow. We're doing this the wrong way round if we focus on the children. And then about 7 years ago, I was approached to join the Parenting for Faith team, and I'm like, oh, I'd love to do that. And so that's how I started with Parenting for Faith.
Fantastic. And you have been contributing, not just sort of teaching Rachel's material, but you have also written a resource called Grandparenting for Faith.
I have. So we kind of the core of parenting faith when I started was a course called Parenting Children for a Life of Faith, and that kind of is the basics, and we ran that a lot. And we used to get feedback from grandparents, and that would often say, I love this stuff, but my grandchildren live in Australia, or I don't see them very often, or they don't agree with me on faith. What's it look like for me? And we're like, the core truths of parenting faith are the same, whether your child's 1 or 57, or whether they live close by. That core truth about how people get discipled is the same, but the application of it is very different in different circumstances. So over the years, we've expanded away from just one sort of course, and now we've got one which and books and things say, if your child's a newborn, this is what parenting for faith looks like. If your child's a teen. And so the grandparenting faith is simply saying, I'm a grandparent that has this treasure of Jesus that I want to share with my grandchildren. What's it look like for me? Because one of the problems with grandparenting that I soon discovered when I started talking to grandparents, because I'm not one, is that it's really complicated, because you've got not only the kind of, you're not the primary parent, so you're not in control of how they're parented, but there's all sorts of other factors that come in, like families are quite dysfunctional at times, or you might live a long way away, or you don't see them very often. And for grandparents, you might be quite poorly, or you might still be working and super busy. So there's all these kind of multiple possibilities around your relationship with your grandchildren, which can make it feel very complicated. And at the same time, so we set about saying, what does parenting for faith look like if you're a grandparent? And at the same time, during COVID, a lady called Sarah Holmes from Liverpool Hope University published this research where she'd interviewed grandparents about how they felt about Christian grandparents, about how they felt about discipling their grandchildren. And she found a couple of things, and they really hit home and I think echoed what we knew. One was, well, they didn't feel very confident about how to do it. And they said, well, some were saying, well, I wasn't brought up in the church. I don't know how to disciple anyone. And others were saying, well, how do you do it? Do you just pray for them? What else can you do? And the other thing was that they didn't feel that they felt confident they were allowed. There was a boundary thing, I think that can come sometimes from, you can't brainwash a child. Well, honestly, if you don't give a child good stuff, they'll get brainwashed by something else. Our job as parents and grandparents is to pass on every good thing we know to our kid, whether that's manners or a love of history or whatever we value. If it's that important to us, let's pass it on. But particularly around faith, there was a boundary issue. Do I have permission to impose my views on the family? And the other significant finding from Sarah Holmes' research was that every single one of the grandparents says the church doesn't help one bit. And I'm like, ooh.
That's hard.
That's hard. And it's not true across the board. During our research, we came across some really good stuff, in particular the Catholic Church are doing. And what we've discovered, which is really exciting, is that other denominations are going on this same kind of little grandparenting thing. It feels like God's doing something. The Salvation Army, the URC, the Bible Society, all sorts of people are kind of having this conversation. So that was the background to the book. And so grandparenting for faith is simply an exploration of what God says about grandparents and their role, about how discipleship happens, because it happens much more naturally than most people realise. And actually, let's be totally practical. How do you do it? So that's what it's all about. And I'd never written a book before, and it had its moments, but generally I really loved it.
Yeah. And well, you're a treasure trove of wisdom and experience, and also you're good at connecting with other people and sort of gathering those stories and feeding them in. So I know that this book is going to resource so many people and encourage them. I think that part of it is like that permissioning and just saying you can do this, and here's some ideas, here's some things you can try.
And the whole thing about parenting faith is, we have a saying, life's messy and discipling is messy. Grandparenting for faith is going to be messy. I remember going on, I'm a netball coach. I remember going on a coaching course, and they said, this lady drew a diagram, said, this is what people think sports progression should be, a straight line like that. And she said, no, it's not. It's a squiggle, and it's a down, and it's an up, and it's a recovery. And discipleships like that, sometimes for talks, I plot my own discipleship curve. Because I grew up in church. I had faith from very early. Mine's horrendously like the Andes Mountains or something. It's up, down, up, down, up, down. And there was a general progression up. But there's been some significant downs even as a Christian. And, you know, our kids, I think one of the things we do as parents and grandparents, we so long for our kids to get God because it's the best thing we know for them. We panic about the progression and we want to see them go from being a tiny tot who sings Jesus loves me, this I know, to a preaching 18-year-old who's solid in their faith as they leave home. And that's not going to happen for many, many reasons. And one of them is that our kids change dramatically in their first 25 years. So you've got your baby. I was the best discipler in the world when my child was one. She loved the songs. We read all the Bible books together. We prayed at bedtime. She loved it. Clap, clap, clap. And then she got her own brain. And then she grew a bit. And then she had other experiences and she questioned. By the time she gets to teenagers, she's wrangling with it. And so she should be. She should be saying, I'm not sure if I believe this. This is what I'm hearing at school. Well, are you sure God made the world in 6 days? Yeah, all those things. And instead of seeing that as a natural progression to discipleship, I saw it as a panic. She's not singing the songs. She's not believing anymore. I have no idea if she's praying because we don't do bedtime prayers, And so we just need the confidence we talk about journeying, co-journeying with children as faith, just like we co-journey with them in every other bit of life. We recognize that, school's a stressful thing and we journey really well with that. And I think in spiritual things, we can get set into a panic mode that they won't get it and we're frightened for them. But we don't stop learning. My mother died last year. She discipled me to the end as I watched her die as a Christian. Wow. We never stop being discipled by people around us. And this is the thing. And so that's kind of the thing. We can't expect our kids or grandchildren to have this easy straight line progression. I would say actually that if your child seems to be the perfect Christian, I'd be worried about that because the wrestling is part of the journey.
Yeah, well, it develops the muscles, doesn't it? The faith muscles and
muscles.
The resilience to deal with doubt and setback and challenge. Yes. And if it is always up and to the right,
yes,
you kind of think something's going to come along that's going to go wrong, and your faith has never been challenged. No. And so a bit of up and down, I think that is, same with relationships. When you have some conflict and you work it out, you actually trust the relationship a bit more. And I think that's got to be true with our discipleship.
It is true.
A bit of hardship helps us know God more.
Yeah.
And
the wonderful thing about being the co-journeyer, if you imagine you take a child on a country walk you've done before, and you're like, oh, this is a lovely walk. Look, that's a great view. Or you might sort of say, be careful, there's a really snaggy bramble bush over there. You don't want to get caught in it. Or let me help you over the stile. You're going on the journey. You might stop and say to the kid, look at that frog. It's fantastic. As the one with slightly more experience who's been there before, you get to point out the pitfalls, the excitement, to explain the route. And that's all discipling is. It's going on that journey and being the one slightly ahead. Because sometimes people say, I don't know my Bible very well. I've not been a Christian very long. I can't disciple. I'm like, if you're on that journey of moving towards Jesus, you can take somebody with you. Mm-hmm. And that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, I think if you're a new Christian as an adult, I think there's real power in going to a kid and go, oh, my mind is blown. I've just met Jesus. And this is now changing me. And this is exciting. I want to tell you about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the life experience that you've got is part of that discipleship as well. Like how you bring your experience of disagreements, doubt, challenge, all of that, how you have wrestled with scripture, how you maybe still don't know things, being able to say to a child, do you know, I've read that passage all my life and I've never understood it, but I know this about God. And when I don't understand passages, this is what I do, or this is how I grapple with it. being able to say that, it just frames things for children in
Well,
such a beautiful way, because
I
it
tell
allows them to not be perfect and to keep growing.
Yeah, and I tell a story in the book. When I was a children's worker, I'm like, I had this really great idea. I was going to have this young mum's Bible study. They've got to drop their older kids off Monday morning, come in. I was going to have croissants and coffee and fruit, and we were going to have a Bible study. It was going to be beautiful. And it did work. And so we had this little group of mums and their toddlers, and it was great. And then Jenny, who was like 89 at the time, said, I like Bible studies on Monday mornings. I would like to come. Jenny was quite frightening, so I said yes. And then Jenny came and she sat in there and dandled a few babies. And then her friends came. And after, I'm like, I'm a bit fed up now. You really changed my group, was set up to be this. But then I sat back and I watched. And what happened was we had these two groups of sort of granny figures and we had these young mums. I no longer needed to teach them about God because all the stories that these old ladies were telling about their long lives with God were teaching the mums, because they had stories of babies who died and who God was when that happened, and stories of we had to move house, or this is what happened in the war, or my teenager and I used to argue like that too, and now this is what happened. And that was the thing. Their long lives with God were doing the discipling that I couldn't do with these young mums, because our long lives just give us more stories of who God is. As part of the research for the book, I decided I'd go and speak to Christian grandparents. So I got some and I spoke to them and I said, tell me what you do to disciple your grandchildren. They went, oh, we don't really do anything, because they didn't really identify what they did, because it turns out they're just being them. So I'm like, well, this isn't very helpful in terms of the book, because
Because they are doing something.
you've told me nothing. You've told me nothing about what's going on. So I thought, well, let's do a little survey of of grandchildren of Christian grandparents. And the question we asked was, what did they do that influenced your faith? And we got, and I'm so chuffed with this number, 321 answers. But the stories were just so extraordinary. And they weren't, we preached sermons and, my grandparents were pillars of the church and they taught me everything from the Bible. It was, I saw the impact God had on my grandparents' life. And this changed me. And sometimes there were things like somebody talked about the stories their Opa told of when he was in a Japanese prisoner of war camp as a child, as a Christian, how God had provided for them. Others talked about that the granddad used to talk about how he loved heaven, he believed in heaven. So when he died, they knew that his faith was going to carry him through. Others talked about the impact of watching their grandparents working out their discipleship and their call to be godlike in their community, and how that had impressed them. And so much of it was people going, my grandparents really loved me and they cared for me, and because this was their value, I wanted it too. And it turned out that it was just being an ordinary Christian but having a close connection with your grandparent made the difference. And I think this is the thing for your grandparents. You do not have to be saints to be influential. You just have to be you. But the trick is to help kids see the part God's playing in that. Like, turn your faith inside out if you want. We talk about that a lot. And the other thing is, we did some research into the impact of being a grandparent. Are grandparents more influential than other people on their grandchildren's lives? And we started with the secular research, and there's a piece of research from Cornell University that says 9 out of 10 grandchildren said their grandparents influence their values and behaviours. That's 90%.
Wow.
Just because it's your grandparent, not because grandparents have sat you down and lectured you, but just because you absorb kind of your norms and your values and behaviours from the people you love. And, and even if I think about my relationship with my grandparents, who weren't Christians and who were quite distant, sort of emotionally and in terms of miles, I still, even now, am influenced by them. Sheffield is where I come from. I've only been there once, but that's where they came from. So I count that as my football team. And my grandmother used to tell this story. She lost an eye when a cricket ball was knocked for six out of when she was walking past the village green. She got knocked on the eye, lost her. If I walk past a cricket match, I am aware that a cricket ball may come and hit me in the face because of that one story. And when you start thinking about your own grandparents, you realise that they influence you in such deep ways just because they exist. And that's your starting place as a grandparent. You have a significant influence over your grandchildren's values, their life, their choices, simply because you exist, not because you've done anything. Just because there's something about this bond, which as Christians shouldn't surprise us because God's designed it. So discipleship starts in the home, but is heavily influenced by the grandparents and extended family and communities that surround it. It takes a village to raise a child. Well, if you think about the significant adults in your faith journey as a child, there will have been people other than your parents who you looked at and thought, oh, that's interesting. This is what faith looks like in this situation. And then we looked at what the kind of religious research said around faith transmission. And again, grandparents have an unexpected influence. We had a curate at church and he'd come to faith, not his parents didn't go to church, but he had a praying grandmother. And I've heard that lots.
I have too. A lot of people talk about the power of a praying grandma.
And then, really interesting, we came across a piece of research from the Catholic Diocese of Southwark. And this lady wanted she was doing research into people, nominal Catholics, coming to faith as an adult. What were the kind of factors that helped that happen? And what she discovered was that if somebody had had a religious or a Catholic or mass-going grandparent, once they decided that this church thing was for them, the fact that the memories of the significance of that for their grandparent rooted it. So they would be looking in their brain going, yes, this is right because it was right for my grandparent. Because somehow we slot into the patterns of our family and our grandparenting, and it felt right. So grandparents have enormous influence without even knowing it. And then when we can activate that influence through what I call normal parenting or grandparenting skills, it's so possible to share faith with grandchildren, whatever their faith is.
That's really encouraging. It's just a set of influence that you were unaware of, but it's there.
It's there. And once I've said that, you're going, yeah, it is
you
there.
Can see it. You can immediately think about your own grandparents and choices you make or values that you hold that they haven't explicitly, or maybe they have explicitly communicated.
But very gently. It's just part of who they are, rather than this is the lecture on values.
This is what you should do.
Yes.
No, it's just who they are, and you think, that really works for them. And I can see the longevity of that in their lived out life, I can see that they didn't do that for a while, and now they've changed and they've come to that decision, and I'm just going to take that wisdom on because they've already earned it for me. Like you do watch people and think, how can
and I think as humans, we don't like new things, as going into the unknown. We tend to go to patterns or places that we're comfortable with. I remember I'm a big fan of Hunted, the TV series, where they have to go undercover for weeks and be hidden. And one of the psychologists said once, pretty much everybody goes back to somewhere they know. So they usually go and hide in an area where they've got relatives or they've been on holiday a lot. That very few people will go to a totally unknown place because we subconsciously will always go back to what we know. And I think it's the same in the way we live. As you go through life in different stages, you're kind of reaching for, I've reached a certain age, maybe you're getting to retirement. Suddenly you're thinking, what does that look like for my parents? What did it look, how did they do it? Because we need patterns to follow. So we naturally go to, and we may choose to reject them, but that's where we go first. To what we already know, which is also, for those of you maybe who don't have grandchildren in church, or we look to those around us as well. So that's part of discipling, saying, what's it look, you'll all have had this experience in church. Somebody gets cancer or a nasty thing, and then you're learning what it looks like to be a Christian in that circumstance. So if you ever go down that road, you've seen it. You've heard the prayers. You've seen somebody tells you, this is what happened when I felt this bad, or, so we have these patterns that we naturally gravitate towards.
That's good. So you said we sort of have this influence. Grandparents have
Yes.
this God-given role or influence and
Yeah.
impact, but there's ways to be more intentional or to activate
Yes.
it. Tell me more. How do we do that?
I think the very first thing is to be connected to your grandchildren. There's a science around connection, and now I'm going to test my brain because there's 3 elements of it. I can never quite remember all 3. But if you imagine a pipe, we've got long water pipes upstairs in the bath between the bathrooms, and they sometimes get blocked. And of course, when the shower's no longer draining, and connections like that. If there's something blocking your connection with anyone, the good stuff can't get through, because what we want is to share with our grandchildren or whoever the good stuff. And so we have to make the connection as strong and clear as possible. And there's some kind of science around grandchildren and grandparents connection, and one is an emotional connection that goes beyond "I love you" to you and I. We have this unique connection that is just high five, you and me. We need each other, and that builds trust, and it also builds vulnerability and the ability to share. You don't open up and share to someone you barely know. I didn't really tell my grandparents anything because I didn't really know them. They were lovely, but I didn't know them well enough to really be brave enough to be vulnerable. In fact, I don't think I even saw them as somebody to be vulnerable with. But I've seen my friends now who are grandparents, and you can see the beautiful otherness. Some of the grandparents spoke about the otherness of the grandparent-grandchild relationship, where somehow kind of parenting bits have gone, so they didn't have to be the ones telling them off, and they could be slightly like sneaking them a 5 on the quiet. You can have a different, a sort of less complex relationship in some ways, which is a real joy and can provide you with this particular role of being a safe place. When you've bickered at home or something, somebody just goes, "Oh, that's rough, come and have a cuddle," that kind of thing. And there's a time element of this, not in the sense it's called regular contact. The second element of this thing is about being regularly in contact. Now, if you live around the corner, that's fine, but we ran pilot groups for the material, and into my friend Mike from church. He said, my mum's 87, she's taught herself WhatsApp so she can message all her grandchildren every day. And I'm like, oh flip, she's formidable. But I thought, it wasn't really about Mike's mum teaching herself WhatsApp, which I was impressed with. It was this power of grandma popping up on your phone just to say hello. And I could immediately see, oh my goodness, I feel special.
It's just the effort to communicate in a way that is innate to those children.
And not just as a reaction to your grandchild communicating with you. You're proactive.
Yeah.
And so the power of that is that it says, you're that important, I thought of you. It's not, you rang me so I'm polite, And so the suggestion is, we talk a little bit about this in the book, is that do things that they don't expect. Pop a little card in the post. Kids don't get post. Ring them up when it's not their birthday. Remember it's a special day today. Send them a note that says, I saw this picture, I thought it was awesome. Share a meme or a video from Facebook. Send a little funny video of yourself on holiday. Basically it's about saying, I can't get you out of my brain. You're so significant to me. I thought this would make you smile because I know what makes you laugh, And the third element, so the first one's emotional closeness, that you build this unique bond, which I think grandparents have naturally on the whole. There is something. My friend was going to become a grandma and she was terrified. She, will I even love this baby? Of course, as soon as she set eyes on it, she was like goggle-eyed and smitten and is never away from this child anymore, But there's something in that. There was a fascinating bit of science about grandmothers' brains. So basically, they wanted to see, was there a particular brain reaction when grandmothers saw their grandchildren? So they took there was 4 photos they showed these grandmas. They wired them up. One was of their daughter, the parent of the grandchild. One was of a woman very similar to the daughter, but not related. One was the grandchild, and one was a similar baby. And what happened was that the bits of the brain that lit up for the child, the mother, and they lit up for the grandchild, they lit up in different ways. So they lit up for the mum kind of in a kind of, oh, I hope she's okay, is she coping kind of way. But the way they lit up for the grandchild was totally besotted bits of your brain went wide. And it was like saying, oh my goodness, even our brain, the grandmother's brains are wired to have a massive emotional response to a grandchild that's even different from the response they have to their own child. Because God's wired us that way. There is this unique bond. And the science also says that kids want that as well. Mm. So that the third element, you've got your emotional closeness, you've got your regular contact, and the third element to really build a strong connection is what's called building a sense of social, social security. And what that means is, I am there for you. So in the way that if another friend told a story, her grandson was about 3, and he had a very businesslike mum. You know, if you fall over and hurt yourself, come on, up you get, you're fine, don't cry, no problems. And she's like, if he falls over in the park, I just pick him up and hug and say, you cry, it's okay, I'm here for you. And that is what that's about. It's saying that regardless of your choices, regardless of, I love you and I am here for you. I may not approve of everything you do. I'm always going to be here for you. My door is always open, or my phone is always open, or you can rely on me not to judge you, that I will be there for you. And those 3 elements are identified as things that grow strong connection with grandchildren and grandparents and make a difference. And it's interesting because I've recently become a great auntie, and I can see as I'm building relationship with my great niece, I'm already thinking about those things. So I'm being a little bit more proactive in the communication, even though it's with her mum. And, you know, and it's interesting. So we can be very proactive in how we build connection with grandchildren. And then once you've got that relationship, because that builds trust and vulnerability, it enables you to start to pass on faith quite proactively. And that can sound quite scary, but actually, if you think about yourself as a parent or a grandparent, you proactively pass on good things all the time, whether that's how to cross the road, or what to do when your best friend falls out with you, or how to prepare a CV, or, you know, first night wedding nerves, whatever it is, you are journeying and you're coaching your children through this. So all discipling a grandchild is simply coaching them as you go about who God is. And one of the problems, so there is a chapter in the book called Nobody Said It Would Be Easy, because that was what all the grandparents said to me as I spoke to them. And I'm like, oh, flip, you know. And they were telling me about families that were fine. You know, it wasn't sort of families that been through, but they, you know, and it's those many elements of things which go up in each family. So, you know, the bigger your family, you know, somebody will be poorly. There might be a falling out. Many times faith isn't the same between generations. Grandchildren get into trouble. You get ill. You know, it's not a straightforward journey, but you can disciple through all of it. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned through Parenting for Faith is that faith when I'm weak is a very powerful thing to share with my child. Because actually, if I only teach her about faith when things are going well, then that's not going to resource her for when her life gets tricky. So it's important that she knows that when I've fallen out and squabbled with her, it's not just that I'm sorry, but who was God in there? How did he change my heart? What did I do? You know, I remember my father telling me about being sacked for, he refused to tell a lie. This was back in the 70s and 60s, so these things happened. His boss wanted him to tell a lie. He was a Christian, he said, I'm not going to tell a lie. He got sacked. I remember Dad telling me that story and how he decided that even if it cost him his job, and he had 3 very small children, he wasn't going to lie. And that story has actually changed the way I behave even today. Those things, we need to share who God is when it's messy. We need to share stories of, like, when I stopped believing in God because your grandma died. That's who God was, because we're all going to hit those times. So that's a bit of a slight off path, but sharing faith as a grandparent is different from sharing faith as a parent, because you're not living at home and you're not in charge of the faith journeys. And one of the interesting things was that God showed me this when I was a little bit before I wrote the book. Actually, I was idling through YouTube looking for something, and a video caught my eye on the side, and it was a watercolor tutorial, and this lady was showing you how to paint a beautiful watercolor of a field of poppies. And I did that thing where you watch and it goes on and on. But the interesting thing was the canvas started like watercolors do, and they'd switch things, and then she just drops blobs in like this. There was a bit of green there, and there was a bit of yellow there, and there was a bit of this. And these things did not look like poppies at all. She didn't do what I would do, which was to draw a nice straight green line and put a red flower on it. It was blobs here, blobs there. And over time, these blobs started to join together. And over time, they became this coherent picture. Now, I'd just seen these kind of splashes of colour. And what God showed me was that discipling's like that, particularly when you're not the primary discipler, that there are these splashes of information about God, or a story, or an example, or an encounter, that are like on our grandchildren's canvas, if you like. And individually, they feel insignificant and not very powerful. But over time, for all our children, grandchildren, God's going to be putting little splashes of his own encounters. They may hear this from God or from church. They may hear this from a book. And gradually this picture gets built up. So I think one of the stresses maybe of being a grandparent is you can't do it all. And you may feel that you can't do very much at all. But actually, every single time you tell a story about God, or your kid notices something, or grandchildren talked about, I saw this poster on my grandma's wall and it said this. That stuck in that person's brain. Now, grandma never would have anticipated that when she put it. Somebody else said, I remember seeing a prayer list stuck on my grandparents' fridge with my name on it, and I thought, I was struck by the fact they were praying for me. Again, that wouldn't have been a deliberate discipling thing. It was a splash of colour. And all these splashes of colour will come together and start to form a bigger and more coherent picture of God.
Yeah.
And so as grandparents, don't feel you can't. God's not calling you to sit them down as a teacher. He's calling you to be yourself and help them see who God is for you and the impact he has on you. Because that's in Exodus 5, possibly. You've got, as a children worker, I did assemblies a million times. I did hundreds and hundreds of assemblies. And of course, you get your favourites, and one of them is Exodus. And I knew the story of the Exodus. I knew exactly what happened when Moses goes to Pharaoh. He goes, let my people go. And Pharaoh goes, and I get all the kids to shout, no! And then I was reading the actual passage rather than just telling it. And I saw something in it that I'd never read before. Do you ever have that thing? You read a Bible verse, you think that so was not there last time. And it says, what happens is, Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, God says, let my people go. And Pharaoh doesn't say no. What he says is, well, who is this God? Why should I do what he wants? And I'm like, oh my goodness. Because for some of us, our grandchildren may not know who God is. So if what they hear is, let's go to church, or let's read our Bible, or God is very good, they're going, I have no idea who this God is. Why on earth should I do that? So our first task is to help people understand the power and beauty and impact of God. And the easiest way to do that is by letting them see the impact he has on our own lives. And in Parenting for Faith, we call that creating windows. It's kind of shorthand for, like, if I glimpse through somebody else's house and I see their layout of their house, or I think got a particularly nice picture on the wall, I learn something that I might want to copy. And we learn by copying. So a really simple example is, If I never pray in a way that another person can see or hear, all they're going to know is that I say I pray. They're not going to know what that looks like or how it sounds. They're not going to hear about the impact of it. So if we do God things in front of our grandchildren appropriately, not, as they happen, as they go, if you normally pray out loud as you look for parking space, do it in front of your kids. They begin to see the impact of God. Stories are massive on that. If you tell stories of, people love stories of who God was when you lost your job, or how God showed you that grandma was the one to marry, or how your heart sang when this grandchild was born and they were safe and you praised God for them. Those little stories are very powerful. And and then we talk about how to explain who God is, because kids have big questions about God. If God loves me, why did he let me break my leg? If God is good, why are some people tortured? All those massive questions. And our job isn't to answer every question. Our job is to share what we know of God and how we wrestle with that question. There may be times when you've got a factual answer, but we talk. So there's a chapter in the book all about how to explain who God is to you, your experiences of God, because kids want answers. And I've recently been doing a bit of, for my sins, youth work, which I never did before, at church. And I'm like, kids love talking about God. And it's true, they do. And, one of the problems you have for children, young people now, is that information about God comes from some really weird places. So they may be a church-going child who reads their Bible, but they'll also be hearing on social media these things about God. RE lessons may be quite interesting at school. They'll be watching YouTube clips. They'll be hearing bits from movies. We can pick up all these funny ideas about God and glue them together. And, one of the things we can do as slightly older Christians is to help them unpick some of that stuff. So a grandchild might, have a very common view of small children. If I do something wrong, God's cross with me. And one of the little stories in the book, we've got these little stories from grandchildren, was just a line from somebody who said, I remember when I'd done something I thought was unforgivable, and my granddad explained that it was okay, God forgave me. As grandparents, that's a simple thing to do, just to share the truth of God as you know it. And we have a chapter on how to share the Bible with children, which is my particular passion, not just how to choose the right Bible for your grandchild, or, how to help them think about it, but actually how to help children see who God is in the Bible, because often the Bible's a story. So if you take the story of baby Moses, it is a fairy story. It goes, bad king wants to kill all the babies, brave midwives don't let him, baby Moses is born, floats in a baby, princess comes down to the river, rescues him, gives him back to mum, everyone lives happy after. Hurrah. And the actual Bible text says nothing about God in it. But actually, with your brain, you're going, I think God must have been active in there. Maybe he was prompted the princess to go down that day. Maybe he shut Moses' mouth so he didn't cry in the reeds and get discovered. We know that God is busy and active, but we can help children wonder about God's role in those things. And so there's lots of practical steps. And one of the things we say a lot at Parenting Faith is, it's always about what's my next step. And so as a grandparent or a parent, you can get quite panicked about, but I should be teaching about the child. I need to explain that to them. Oh my goodness, they're not going to church. What am I going to do? Stop. It's about chatting with God. What's my next step? I had a lovely little story from Kate, who works for me at Parenting Faith, also ran a pilot group, some grandparents. And in the week when they were talking about connection, one grandparent said she was very upset because her little grandchild, for some reason, was frightened of her and wouldn't connect with her. And so they talked about next steps. So she went and said, okay, I'm going to ask God what my next step is. And she came back the next week and said, God's told me my next step is to invite this little girl to come in the car with me to go and visit her auntie. So she did that, and the child agreed. And by Christmas, they were hand in hand walking into church together. Now, that next step was nothing overtly to do with discipleship, but it was the right next step.
It was about connection and that emotional.
Yeah, and to take the pressure off yourself as a disciple, as a grandparent. So your job is to add a splash here and a splash there on the canvas. It's not to do the whole job. God's busy doing it.
Yeah.
He's not expecting you to be, do what you can and what you know. Love your grandchild as best you can. Share what you know of God as best you can. Pray to them. We've got a chapter on ways to think about praying for your grandchildren. And just keep asking him, what is my next step for this grandchild? And then just do it.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm thinking of grandparents I know whose children are not walking with God, and that sort of feeling of heartbrokenness, maybe even shame or judgment towards themselves.
Yeah.
Did I do something wrong? And then now they have grandchildren, and that feeling of like, what am I allowed to do? How can I pass on faith when I didn't manage with my children, or my children have walked away with it? And I'm desperate for my grandchildren to connect with God, but I really don't want to upset my children and cause any more rift in the relationship. What can I do? And do you have suggestions? I mean, obviously, the stuff you've already said about building the connection and just living your life as honestly as you can. And again, talking to God, what's my next step? But have you, I'm sure in the book this came up of those boundaries. How do we engage when children are sort of saying, no, you can't do that with the grandkids?
Yeah, it's actually heartbreaking, the stories you hear, and they're really common even within your own church. There'll be this mix of, in my church, I've got 2 grandparents whose grandchildren in Australia. I've got at least one where they're not allowed to speak about faith at all. I've got one where they will not talk to them. There's this whole, and then there's others where the relationships are, just difficult. Families dysfunction, divorce, and it's really hard.
Yeah.
I think the one about faith is particularly painful, and the first thing I'd want to say is God doesn't hold you responsible for your children's faith. They make their own choices.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, because none of us are perfect and none of us have passed on faith perfectly. None of us have been perfect role models for God. But, at the end of the day, your children, there's 2 things. 1, they're responsible for their own faith journeys. But 2, God's not finished with them.
Yeah.
And I think this is a trap we fall into. And this is part of the panic in the teenage years, is that 18 is done and dusted and they're set for life. And they're not.
No.
We're never finished. And so the first thing is to know that God's not finished with your children, and that you, even my mum at 86 was still discipling me. Yeah. That discipling, you can still disciple an adult child using the same ideas. And we speak a little bit about that in the book. There's stuff on the website about that. But stop thinking it's done and dusted and start remembering that you're still on a journey. You're still journeying with them. So part of that is maintaining the connection as best you can. And again, that might require some exploration of what are the barriers to your adult child's faith. Could it be a family issue? Could it be that they had a big question about God that was never answered as a child? Sticky faith in the States, which research into why faith does or doesn't stick into adulthood. And so one of the most important things for teenagers is the big questions about death and suffering and justice. All the big God questions do need to be addressed. And I don't know, when I was growing up, they weren't really addressed. So they may have questions about God in their head. It may be, well, it doesn't make sense if God's this person, but these things happen. Maybe they've had a death in their family or some awful thing happen there. Well, like, God can't care. What are the barriers that are preventing them from seeing who God is like you see? And it may require a conversation if you can. You may even know that actually maybe you need to say sorry for something. So reflect on the barriers and see yourself still as their parent, because you are their parent. You'll be parenting them in other ways, like, as a child approaches marriage, they're going to be looking to you to say, what's marriage like, when you buy your first house, it's often your parents who guide you through the process. You're still parenting them, still have those relationships. Don't let faith become a bone of contention. This came over very strongly. My grandparents said, we'd love to see the grandchildren get baptized, but we know that's not right. Others would say, it's really difficult. They come to stay. Do we go to church, or do we say no, because actually we want to prioritize the connection? And there's no one rule for any of that.
Yeah.
But, prioritize your children, your connection with them, and your love for them. It doesn't mean being doormatted or anything else, but you're still their parent, and that is your primary relationship with them, not discipler. And so I think know that God's also on the case is comforting. It may not make you feel less frustrated. I think one of the other really interesting things is to think about a child at 6 who isn't allowed to talk about God or whatever is another faith. They aren't in charge of their own destiny and choice at that point. But a child of 13, 14, 15, a grandchild maybe who's been kept away from faith, they'll be curious on their own. And even if they're not allowed to talk to you about faith, they will know full well that you have faith. And you will still, just because, going back to the thing, just because you're a grandparent, you have influence, you will still have influence. They may choose one day to ask you a question, and then you can answer it. Bide your time. I think one of my favourite things of all was from a grandparent who talked about they were banned from talking about faith with their grandchildren at all, which is devastating, partly because if God's part of your life and church is part of your life, it's actually really hard to talk about anything without mentioning him.
Yeah.
I can only talk about the library and the Don. Yay. And she said that she kept a journal for each of her grandchildren where she wrote and shared the God stuff that she wasn't allowed to say with them. Wow. And so in this particular one, started when they were born, and she said, you were born today and I thank God for you. And she just said that every now and then she'd add a bit, it's your birthday, or I felt you would have loved this bit from the Bible, or this is a picture God gave for me. And she kept this record, and she said, one day, and it makes me want to cry really, I may be able to give it to them, or I can leave it to them. Wow. And they will then, and it blew my mind, because I'm like, there'll be this record of a grandparent's love and hope and dreams and godness for them that will be theirs. That even if you weren't able to say it in your lifetime, it will be this tangible record of the importance of God, so much so that you wanted to share it with this child.
It's a beautiful idea.
It feels like a last resort, but it also now feels like if I become a grandparent, it's what I want to do.
Yeah, as a bonus as
well. As a treasure.
You can say it, yeah.
How amazing would that be to have a record of your grandparent's heart for this child?
Yeah.
It would be stunning. So, in the book we say if you're grandparenting, you can grandparent for faith. Meaning if you have a relationship, a connection with a grandchild, you will be grandparenting for faith. And all the book's saying is giving you confidence to do that. And some real top tips.
Yeah.
And that one.
It's so encouraging. My dad, my folks live in America and we're obviously in the UK, and my dad wrote letters to each of the children.
Yes.
And the joke was that his handwriting was so bad that I then had to read them out loud to the children. But he would diligently handwrite these letters, and sometimes it was just telling them about his day. Often it was how proud he was of them. Sometimes it was like, here's a Bible verse that I've been, and we still have those stacks. He passed away a little over a year ago, but we still have those letters. This sort of, as you say, like a testament of his love, his care. And I think partly because it's unusual. We started off talking about the grandma learning WhatsApp so she could be on their phones all the time. But sometimes the sort of old-fashioned traditional cards and letters, as you say, the kids don't get post anymore. It makes it very exciting. And, my mother-in-law sends she sends advent calendars in the post, you know, because she doesn't live
Yes.
local. And the kids know every year, and there's this sense of excitement of like, grandma was thinking of us,
Yes.
and she provides this thing to do with
Yes.
Christmas and Advent. So yeah, it's very powerful. That just the
And
simple things,
children
the
love
gestures.
family history as well. So,
Yeah,
the stories of when I was a boy, this is where I went to school, and,
yeah,
those things. But God is interweaved in all of those as well. So
definitely.
as you share family stories, I think we're very good at hiding the God bits of stories, isn't it? But to
Yeah,
be avert,
yeah. I
when we
think it
bought
has.
my house, this is what God did.
Yeah, faith has been quite personal, and often I think a generation before you didn't ask about money or faith. You know,
No,
you kept it all
no.
kind of behind a wall. But as you say, to pass it on, we have to bring it out from behind closed doors, and not be so embarrassed about it. And um, maybe we're embarrassed because we think we're doing it wrong.
Or it's a habit we're not in.
Yeah.
I think I remember thinking when years ago I used to work at school, and if somebody says what do you do at the weekend, I'll be like, oh well, on Saturday we went to the New Forest for a walk, we did this, and I probably wouldn't even say on Sunday went to church. But if I did say on Sunday went to church, I wouldn't have said, and the worship was amazing, and or when the preacher, there was this verse and it just jumped out at me. I would always close it down,
Mm,
but actually there
yeah.
was so much more to that story I could tell.
Yeah.
And so
And it
sometimes it's just
impacted you,
getting
and
into
it
the
was
habit of
interesting.
voicing it,
Yeah. Yeah, we think people won't be interested,
but they're not.
but
They're
they
so
are. Well, because they
interested.
don't go to church, so they're
Yeah,
fascinated. What happens there? Tell me more. Why?
yeah,
Why do you go? You know, why do you give
yeah.
up your Sunday to do that? I think people would be fascinated to hear.
Mm.
So brings us nicely onto the subject of church. So
Yeah.
you said at the beginning that grandparents often said churches don't do anything to support us as grandparents or grandparenting for faith. Have you got suggestions that there will be church leaders, there'll be key volunteers listening to this, that churches can do to really support grandparents?
Yes, I think the first thing is to start talking about it, because the impression from the research that Sarah Holmes did was, and it resonated with me when I look at the grandparents of my, and it's a sweeping statement. I look at the grandparents of my, but it felt like there was this fairly disempowered generation of people feeling their time had gone,
Mm.
that their kind of influence was all tied up in their children 40 years ago, and they'd blown it, or they hadn't, or their children now live a long time, their job was done, and they couldn't do any more. And also this sense of, I want to love my grandchildren well, and that means sharing God with them, but I don't know how. So I think the first thing is to start talking about it honestly. Again, a part of somebody I came across during the research is a lady called Catherine Bergen, and she's the marriage and family life advisor in the Diocese of Brighton Arundel and Catholic Church, and they're much hotter on grandparents than we are. And she runs grandparenting groups in many parishes that she can persuade them to. And she says all she does is get them together to say, start talking about your grandchildren, and that's it, they're off. Um, you know, and her groups are quite simple. The rule is you meet once a month, and every time you meet, you pray for the grandchildren. What else you do, she doesn't mind. But there is this sense that I remember when my daughter was born, and she was a really colicky baby who never stopped crying, and I was exhausted, and I thought I was a terrible parent. And I eventually got out to a baby group. And this is rather disgusting out of the story, but it illustrates it. And I was feeling like, these other people talk about this child was sleeping for 4 hours at a stretch, and this one was doing this, and I'm like, I'm just barely here. And then a nappy was being changed opposite me. We were all sitting on the floor, and this baby boy did this most disgusting green poo. And I honestly thought, well, Hannah doesn't do green poos. I'm an okay mum. And that was,
I'm winning.
I'm winning at something. And I just remember that moment, and suddenly I realised I was okay.
Yeah.
I was okay. I had this tribe to journey with now.
Yeah.
And I think our grandparents need a little tribe where they feel and given permission to talk not just about their grandchildren and their football or their school or where they live, but to talk about how much God loves them and how much they want to share that with them. So I say get yourself a grandparenting gang. So I think we need to, as churches, we need to start saying, God's got a particular role for you as grandparents. It's not onerous. It's not going to pile you with shame and guilt, but it's going to say, let's explore how you can share God. And we could do that together. And in the book, we've got a small group guide for each chapter, so you just some ideas for how you could work that through together. I think too, churches, and again, we don't always do this very well, to be really honest about the ups and downs of being a parent and discipling, and the fact that it's, you know, I'm a single parent, and for a long time, I kind of quite subconsciously felt that I was therefore a failed parent, you know, and that in churches, so in churches and certain church websites, if you've got one of these, I want you to go to your website. I want you to look at the pictures you put up about your leaders. Do they scream a perfect Christian is happily married with 3.4 perfect children and shiny, or are they saying we're just ordinary people who happen to be on this journey? Because a lot of people default to this idea that if you are a successful Christian, you have a perfect family life. And that's just not true. You should be aspiring to be a gentle, a lovely family, but life is messy. Things go wrong. Kids don't always make decisions we want them to. We're not responsible for all their choices. We may get bits wrong, but the whole journey of us as disciples is that we get things wrong and we repent and we change and we try to allow God to transform us, but we're not finished yet.
Yes.
And so to say it's completely normal for grown-up children not to be Christians, that's fine. It's not happy, but we can still pray, we can still be influential, we can still have conversation, we can still cheer each other on. You know, in possibly Deuteronomy, there's that story, isn't there, where Moses sends the Israelite army out to fight the Amalekites, and he goes up to the top of the hill and he says, it's fine, I've got my hands up, I'm going to win this battle. He's like this. And after a while he flags and he puts his hands down, and the Amalekites start to win, and he puts his hands back up, but he gets exhausted, and so Aaron and Hur just come one side and hold an arm up. They win. And you know, that's quite a nice metaphor, really, isn't it? I can't do this on my own. Can I find two other people to stand with me and be my Aaron and my Hur? So we can do this together. And it could be that you've got stuff in your family, that grandparents have stuff in their family they don't want to share with the whole congregation. But could they find two safe people to stand with them in that little bit of the journey? Let's talk about the messiness of discipleship, but the hope we have that God's not finished with our families each. And then get really practical. Have conversations. So it's normal for people to say, I'm really annoyed, you know, about, I'm really sad that my family don't follow Jesus, but would you pray with me about that? And somebody else is saying, I don't know what to do because they're coming for Easter and I love coming to church on Easter, but I don't want to, I feel bad. I don't know what to do because I want to annoy them, you know. So we can normalize this normal type of up and down family.
Yeah.
And I think, and then actually to coach people in how to disciple well. Because I was interested in the research that said a lot of people saying, well, actually, I don't know how to do it. So let's start teaching that.
Yeah. I mean, Parenting for Faith has such excellent resources on your website. There's a podcast. There's a billion topics on your website that you can.
There are a billion.
It's you know, like, how do I talk to children about politics, about all sorts of weird and wonderful things.
Yeah, it
the
is
hard questions kids ask.
Yeah,
and you're not saying here's the right answer. You're saying here's how you talk about it. Here's how you frame it.
Yes.
Here's how you tell stories about it.
Because
here's questions you can ask. It's really helpful.
What's going to disciple somebody isn't the right answer.
Exactly.
So I can always have an answer. I can give you an answer for the Bible for anything, by the way, just saying. But that's not going to help somebody wrestling in the middle of, you know, to be told that cast all your cares on God because he cares for you is absolutely true and right. But it doesn't answer the question as, I am terrified the bailiffs are coming tomorrow to take everything away.
Yeah. How do I cast my cares on him?
How do I wrestle? How do I get
scared?
through that now with God?
Yeah.
And that's what we need is to know the nitty gritty of an ordinary wrestling with God and how to cope when we mess up, how to, you know, just hearing from other people. This is what we do with our grandchildren. We'll give you ideas for what you can do with yours.
Yeah.
You know, and the whole thing. And I think one of the most important things about church and grandparents is not many grandparents get to take their grandchildren to church regularly. There are a few, and that's lovely. And if you do, in the book, we got a little chapter on that, and it's like, these are some ways to really help your kids engage with what's going in church. But I think the bigger thing about church, and this is fascinating to me, is that even if a grandchild or anyone you know doesn't come to church, you can help them understand how brilliant it is. Because if we don't, well, the example we use in the book, we take the TARDIS. So Doctor Who fans, remember the TARDIS? When Doctor Who started, the TARDIS was I just about remember from my childhood, they were these blue police boxes. And you'd see one, you go, I know exactly what's in there. There's a little bench, a little telephone and a notepad. It's a police box. So you see it and you go, I know what that is, you walk straight past. But actually, if you went in the TARDIS, you'd find it was amazing. You know, it had multiple rooms, it had gyms, it had spas, it has other worlds, it has everything. And I think this is the problem with church, is if a non-church goer sees the building at the end of the road, they literally think they know what it is, but they don't.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what the beauty of church is until you get into
a TARDIS, isn't it?
It's a TARDIS.
It's bigger on the inside, and it's
yes,
not.
And
it's not just the benches.
More because, and I think even if your grandchild never comes to church, the way you talk about church and the way you explain or create windows into the impact church has in your life makes it something that then becomes in their mind a possibility for them too. So if you talk about the fact that, you know, your church, for example, has a community clear-up weekend and we do it because we think God asks us to care for our neighbours, that will lodge in somebody's brain. If you talk about church as a place I found refuge after my divorce, and it's maybe at some point your grandchildren will need refuge and think, oh, maybe that's what church is. So the way we talk about church is really significant, that even if they never ever open the door, it's lodged in their brain as a TARDIS rather than this bland building that they walk past and think they understand. And I think that's the thing, people don't know about the possibilities of something unless somebody shows it to them. And you know, I think for many non-church goers, I mean, you like me, you've probably fielded extraordinary questions from people about church. You have no idea what goes on in there. And so I think, you know, part of I remember one of the answers from the grandchildren questionnaire was about the church, and this lady said, my grandparents' church was very other. It was a Gaelic Catholic mass, but it meant that when I went to church, I knew what to expect. So even in the weirdness of a Gaelic Catholic mass, there was probably nothing like the church she went to. She knew there was something from that became a possibility for them. And we know the statistics that 75% of toddlers are in contact with the church through toddler group. That means that when your granddaughter has her first child, she may just be thinking, somewhere in her brain has lodged this idea that church is a place that cares for others, so she'll choose the church. Maybe your grandchild in the future will undergo some stress or bereavement or something, and because of your picture of church that you've drawn for them, will know that maybe church is somewhere that will be helpful for me. What you do is you go from it just being a box at the end of the road to a possibility for them too. Yeah. So even if you never take them to church, you can influence how they feel about church and just help them understand the wonderful TARDIS of church.
I love that as an image. So we've talked a lot about the book. People can get a hold of that anywhere you buy your books. I know it's on Amazon and other good bookshops. There is the Parenting for Faith website, which has video resources, lots of free things, free blogs, free videos, everything's free. And there's a podcast for Parenting for Faith. So you can, if you are having lots of interesting chats with grandchildren, here are ways to frame it. Or if they raise something and you're like, I have no idea how to talk about that, you know, go to Parenting for Faith. There's probably a little podcast.
And we always say, if you can't find the answer, contact us, because our material is very much shaped by people who use it. So if there's something missing, we actually love real people. So if you send us an email saying, my grandchild asked a really interesting question, I'll be like, yeah, this is fun, let's answer it. one of us will answer it and try and point you in the right direction.
Yeah, so it's such an incredible resource. And as you said, in the back of the book, there are small group resources. So
Yes.
you could get the book and do a book club with your friends. You can create a grandparent gang and your church to get together and pray. I just think this is such an important ministry, an important thing to get behind, because this is one of the key ways that we pass on faith to the next generation. And it's so near and dear to all of our hearts. Like these are children that we love, and
Precious,
they are precious in God's sight, and grandparents are precious in our hearts and near and dear to
and
God's
you're not
heart.
done and dusted.
No, he's not done with us. He's definitely not done with us. Thank you so much, Becky, for your
It's been fun.
energy, enthusiasm, all your amazing stories. And I really hope this inspires and encourages a lot of grandparents to just keep doing what they're doing, keep loving on those grandchildren, maybe learn how to WhatsApp, write a few letters and keep praying, because God hears those prayers. Thank you, Becky, for your time.
Thank you.
Roots for Churches produce weekly resources for children, youth and all-age services. Each engaging session is centred on a Bible passage, exploring and responding to God's Word today, and connecting with God, our world and each other. Easy to download craft templates, games, activities and colouring sheets are all included. We offer prayers for worship, intercession and communion, thought-provoking articles on leadership and so much more. From £1.35 a week, there's no better value subscription to cover all your church's needs. From sermon ideas, Bible notes for preaching, song suggestions, dramas, group Bible study materials and seasonal resources like our ready-to-go nativity trail and carol service plans, there is so much to explore. We know you're busy, so we've designed Roots resources as ready-to-go sessions or a launchpad to spark your own creativity, saving you hours of prep time, or to give you a bit more time for relationships. So head to our website to subscribe or see what it's all about with a 1-month free trial, rootsforchurches.com. Please subscribe so you catch all our future episodes. Thanks for listening.